Awesome, awesome. So usually when I talk to groups, I have a little spiel that I do that won't work quite as well via video, but I'm going to do it anyway. I always play a game called Two Truths and a Lie. And so I tell my audience 3 things, and they have to guess which one of them is the lie. Typically, I say, let's see, I've got 5 kids, I have worked for IBM, and I've been to all 50 states. And of course, I'll get some varying number of students that are people who decide which is which. Most people look at me and decide I probably do have 5 kids, so that's not usually the one people guess. My husband and I have 5 kids between 30 and 20. 2 of them are actually in IT. The other 2 are what I call people. Not that IT people aren't people, but they're special people. And one who, when she finds herself, will have a college degree, bless her heart. So I actually grew up on the south side of Chicago for the most part, but when I finished college, I actually went to Chicago State University, which is what's considered an MSI, or minority serving institution. Our institution was almost completely African American and Hispanic. Once I finished that, I actually moved to Minnesota. I took a job. My degree is in computer science. So I worked in industry for 12 years. So I actually was an IT architect. I did work for IBM. I worked for Cargill, which if you're in Minnesota, I'm positive you know what Cargill is. I also worked for Target. I did a lot of store support, so point of sale, making sure that snow blowers ring up at a discount in Minnesota and Alabama gear rings up here in Alabama. I also work for Northwest Airlines. They have since merged with Delta. So I haven't been to all 50 states. I've been to, I believe, 42 states. So I haven't gone north of Massachusetts, and I haven't done like Wyoming, Idaho, and somehow I think I've danced around maybe West Virginia. I'm unclear how that managed to happen. I worked for industry for 12 years. I decided to go back and get my PhD. I think I always wanted to get my PhD because I always wanted to teach. It was certainly more than I ever thought it would be. I think at the time I thought people with PhDs just teach. It turns out that although I teach, I do a lot of research. So I get to decide what problems are important to me, and I get to spend a lot of time trying to solve those problems. And if I'm smart, I actually find people who are willing to pay me to solve those problems. A lot of the problems I've worked on have been my sister and a lot of my friends are in the military, so I did a lot of cooperative robotics, so coordinating lots of robots without them necessarily talking to each other, something humans do fairly easily, but it's a little bit more difficult to figure out how to make robots to do that well. I also spend a lot more time these days working on what we call Internet of Things and senior citizens. Internet of Things is just this idea that everything can now be connected, right? I know you see the light on my face, but I could actually tell Alexa in my house to turn that light off or on or up or down because that light's actually computerized. So I've been working with seniors doing computer literacy, trying to figure out where we can use voice and smart homes to make them safer, happier, keep them independent as long as possible. So that's probably me in a nutshell. Oh, and I should probably mention that although I haven't been to all 50 states, I've been to about 8 different countries. Some on vacation. I do a lot of presentations internationally, so I've presented in both Taiwan and Japan. But then some of that is just, you know, fun travel where we go places with the kids or with the family. And my other I have a lot of hobbies. I like to read, I like to knit, but these days my husband and I, because all the kids are gone, our big thing is we have an RV. So we're motorhome people, so we drive around in our RV and camp a lot. So that's kind of our vacation. I didn't necessarily know I want to go to college, but as far back as I can remember, my parents told me I was going, so I never really thought I had a choice. That's pretty incredible because neither one of my parents actually had a college degree, but they spent a lot of time and energy making sure that we were ready for college. In terms of computer science, yeah, I thought I was going to be a doctor, I was going to be a vet, I was going to be an electrical engineer, electrical engineering tech. My first semester in college, I even was like nursing for like a week or two. So I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And as most of you probably know, computer science, unless you know someone who does computer science, then it's really hard to wrap your mind around what that is, right? 30 years ago, when, there's Windows 1.0, but, unless you were middle class, you didn't actually have a computer, right? So it would be hard to kind of say, hey, this is what I want to do. But fortunately enough, I was electrical engineering tech, and I was forced to take Fortran. I say forced. I took Fortran. Yes. And yeah, now most people don't say, hey, C, Ada, Pascal, ooh, Fortran, right? But I took Fortran. I was a sophomore, and back in those days, you had to go to the lab because we didn't have computers. And I'm looking around, and the kids around me are struggling. I mean, they are struggling, and I am having a blast. I put my little code in, and then I'd go get a soda or whatever because, you couldn't just hit compile. And I figured out really quickly I was very, very good at it. And I also realized that the people around me were very, very bad. And I loved it. So, at that point, I'm thinking, wow, I like doing it. There's a demand for doing it, and I'm good at it. Not many people get that trifecta, right? So since then, I have not looked back. So I didn't know I was going to be computer science, but I'm glad and happy that I happened upon it. When I was in high school, and I know they have these programs now, but they had them back then. When I was in high school, I went to the community college in the afternoon. So I took high school classes in the morning, and in the afternoon I went and took electronics. So I've always been what I consider to be ones and zeros kind of girl, right? I like to know how. My saying is, I want to know what it looks like when it hits the wire, right? I'm one of those people who, great what's happening in front of me, but I want to understand how it works all the way down to the electrons. And robotics was that thing, right? It wasn't so much that, when I was young, I want to be a roboticist, or even when I started grad school, I wanted to be a roboticist. But robotics brought together everything I loved, right? It was hard, which I loved. It was math, which I loved. It was hardware, soldering and bench equipment, which I loved. And then it was programming, right? Artificial intelligence. We do frameworks in Java, and we have iOS, iPad apps, and it allowed me to bring absolutely everything I was to a single discipline. I could have done a lot of different things, but I like the hardness of it. I also like the tangibleness of it, right? I mean, I can write a program, but I know it doesn't work when the robot hits the wall, right? So that's a bad thing if you didn't know. The robot hitting the wall, that's a bad thing. So if you wanted to prepare for it, it's math. Computer science is this weird thing, right? Because it's engineering, but computer science is really an applied math, and you really just can't get around the math piece. But what I would say about that is I had a good girlfriend, and her thing was math is beautiful, right? Math is like the language of the world. It is your ability to describe and explain and predict what's going to happen in the world. Nothing else you can do other than math can do that. And once you see kind of that beauty in math, I think that then will carry you forward. Because I think you can learn to program, with enough effort. And I think, hardware for all of us is, certainly a learning thing. As I tell people, sometimes we let the magic smoke out, which just means we, fry electronics from time to time. But you have to have you have to want to do math. But the other thing I would say is you have to be curious. You have to be fearless. And you have to be persistent. Here's the thing. Everything in life is a math problem. 1 plus 1 is always 2. You may have 1 and you may have 2. That other 1 is there someplace, and you may have to dig for it for a while, but 1 plus 1 is absolutely always 2. And if you're willing to believe it's that simple and just keep digging for the answers, then I think you'll be prepared. I think the young people that I work with, the hardest thing is not having confidence. You got to be persistent. You got to be fearless. So interestingly enough, maybe preparation isn't so much about schoolwork as it is frame of mind. So I get that question more often, right? Because Minnesota and Alabama, there's absolutely no link to that, right? Interestingly enough, my father was born and raised in Athens, Alabama, which is about 2 hours north from here. So if you go to Athens, Alabama, everybody with the last name Anderson is absolutely related to me, right? So you go there and Walmart, hey cousin, how's it going? And my father actually moved back to Alabama, and okay, let's be for real. I wanted to get away from the snow. But beyond that, I was tenure track. I had teenage kids, and I wanted to spend more time with my father, and Alabama afforded me the ability to do all of those things. So in some respects, even though I've never lived in Alabama, I've spent a lot of my life in Alabama. One thing I should say is I teach for the University of Alabama, and for people who are my age or older, you probably know what the University of Alabama is historically significant for. It is the school where the National Guard had to be called out to allow black people to attend. So I actually worked for a university that my father couldn't even go to. How powerful is that, right? It's absolutely poetic. Me on my soapbox a little bit here. It's an interesting thing about the United States, right? Almost all of our innovation has come out of the military, right? So I sometimes say jokingly, we don't worry about anything we can't strap a gun or a bomb to. So I'm kind of being funny in some respects, but I think because of the baby boomers, for the first time in history, the military will not drive innovation. I believe the baby boomers will. And if you go to Europe and you go to Asia, they are all very actively working on this issue of having people who are getting older and using technology to support them. We are going in that direction in this country, whether we know it or not. We're going to be forced to. So, robotics for the sake of manufacturing, yeah, that's great. Robotics for the sake of protection and homeland and all that, that's great. But I see robotics becoming much more personal and being a much more enabling kind of technology. I've told people my next car will be autonomous. I really believe that, right? My current car is quite autonomous. Sometimes it thinks it knows more than I do, but I see robotics really finally being focused on solving the problems of the human condition. There were people along the way that were very helpful. At Chicago State, I actually took a semester off and did an internship. And it was an internship that the department chair got for me, and he got me an internship working with his son at NEC Corporation. If you're my age, you know what NEC Corporation is. You know, so he was certainly instrumental in kind of helping me to get to where I wanted to be. I mean, not any one person, but, you know, I've been fortunate. I've almost always worked for people in the IT industry that looked out for me. They appreciated how hard I worked. They appreciated how smart I was, and so they always kind of looked out for me. So I can't really say that there's one person in terms of IT, but a lot of people. As far as being a professor, I can say that I've had probably a handful of people who have been my little angels, you know, working behind the scenes to help me. I don't know if you guys know Maria Genie. She's actually a professor at the University of Minnesota. And she has been, from the moment she met me before I was admitted to the university till after I graduated and got a professorship, she has been absolutely an incredible supporter. So if you find yourself over at the University of Minnesota, stop into her office. She'll be glad to see you and talk to you. So.
Well, Jerry here in the audience actually just met her a couple of weeks ago, or met with her.
Good.
So we have, yeah. He heard her speak. So one of the things that we're here to do is actually find some tangible, real-world type scenarios. And you said you had children, right? So there are, yes. So you know, national organizations like Black Data Processing Associates. They have coding programs for high school. You have the National Society for Black Engineers, or I call it NSBE or NSBE. Mm-hmm. You have BIT. BIT just had their annual conference here, their inaugural conference in Minneapolis in the Twin Cities. And then we have other organizations. I just was introduced to an incredible organization called IAMCS, Institute for African American Computer Science Mentors, or if I blew that in NSBC. So we have all these national organizations that are doing good. However, are there other programs? So what I'm really trying to get at is, can you help design or just talk about maybe a pipeline that you could think of would be a great way for a parent to think about what types of activities that they can, you know, either join these larger organizations or leverage larger organizations? Because that's one of our goals with the Minnesota STEM Partnership, is to be that conduit or that pathway. But in your experience with your children, and was there any architecture going on behind it? Did you plan some of these things out, or did you take advantage of what just happened to be the best of the breed at the time? So if you could elaborate on that.
So I've been a member, I was first a member of BDPA when I finished college, probably in like 1991. My kids were really little then, but as they got older, you know, I knew we had kind of the HSCC and the youth thing, and my children were absolutely not interested in competing. Interestingly enough, they found out about it from some other BDPA person, and of course, when they heard it from that person, then they thought it was the greatest thing ever. So they actually the three older ones actually competed in HSCC, but not through any effort of mine. So I think that was a good experience for them because, you know, even though I think they're quite a bit like me, they really needed to have that mentorship and that guidance from other people, right? And BDPA really helped them with that. But as for parents, there are a lot of organizations, but there are very few organizations that are really targeted for high school students. NSBE is very strong, but NSBE I think is a lot of kind of college. And NSBE is the Society for Black Engineers, and although computer science is certainly an engineering discipline, it feels like some of what they do is computer science, but some of what they do isn't. There's ACM, also a collegiate organization. That's the Association for Computing Machinery. And they are the professional organization for computer scientists, but there is no high school piece there. IMCS, we certainly have kind of a college piece and a faculty piece, research piece, but we also don't have a high school piece. So, you know, you talk about Lego League and some of the other programs. There's kind of the engineering piece, and then there's kind of the computer science piece, right? And depending upon what organization you get involved in, you'll get varying amounts of kind of engineering, hardware engineering, mechanical engineering, and computer science. There really, other than HSCC, there really aren't any high school competitions that are purely coding. You can correct me if I'm wrong. So depending upon, I mean, I think the Lego Leagues and that kind of thing, I think that's great because it gives students, you know, high school students a chance to look at the whole kind of range of what you can do when it comes to engineering. So, you know, you don't necessarily want them to focus in on one particular area. But if it is computer science, you know, that they're looking for, then you definitely want to try to get them into some organization that's a bit more computer science-y. One thing I am going to bring up is there is a national movement to bring computer science into high schools. And NSF, the National Foundation, is behind this. The idea is that computer science classes should be available to all high school students. The big issue is there is no certification for computer science. It's usually taught either by math teachers, by science teachers, or by business ed teachers. So if your child can take computer science in high school, they should take it. If they have the ability to take the AP class, whether they take the AP test or not, allow them to do that. And there are a lot of resources, Black Girls Who Code, code.org. There's a lot out there for students who want to learn how to code. So maybe not organization, but resources. Actually made up of computer scientists, computer engineers, electrical engineers, and mechanical engineers. So if you want to be a roboticist, you can be a mechanical engineer, or you can be a computer scientist, or you can be an electrical and computer engineer. So you can do any of those depending upon whether you like the idea of building mechanisms or if you like the idea of coding. I do know of one person who actually dual majored in mechanical engineering and computer science because he really wanted to be in robotics, and he actually works for Lockheed Martin doing exactly that. So at the University of Alabama, our dean will say this. He'll say, in 4 years you'll have a degree, but what else will you have, right? So certainly there's kind of these prescribed degrees that you take either in electrical engineering or mechanical or computer science. But if it's robotics you want to do, there are even college-level robotics competitions. There's robotics clubs you can work with. I have a lot of undergraduate students who come do robotics in my lab. I even had a high school student do a robotics high school project in my lab. So, you know, one thing I think young people are really good at doing is kind of building their experiences. And you have so much to choose from. You know, a degree in computer science is just part of it, right? It's all the other things you decide to do with your time that are important. So I think certainly there's the formal education piece of it, but I think the informal piece is actually just as important, right? Those are the experiences you choose for yourself. Those are the problems you choose for yourself. Now, if you want to talk about computer science proper, robotics is actually only a slice of that. Again, there's cybersecurity, there's software engineering. There's a lot of work happening in human-centered computing or human user interface. cloud computing, parallel computing, networking, network security, mobile networks, ubiquitous computing, which is kind of the Internet of Things. All of that kind of starts with a basic computer science degree, right? So that's generally Calculus 1, Calculus 2, linear algebra, discrete math, statistics. It's going to be probably programming 1 and 2. You're going to do some electronics. You're going to, do database storage and retrieval, communications, networks. But all of the accredited programs have a lot of leeway for how you build your degree. At the University of Alabama, our degree is 120 credit hours, but we have 15 free electives. So we expect you to take those free electives and add on to your computer science degree. You want to do computer forensics, minor in criminal justice. You want to do human-computer interface, you minor in psychology. You want to do the genome project, you need to get some biology classes. So I guess what I'm saying is basically, formal education is important, but more important is how you build around it, depending on what you want to do. And fortunately enough, in computer science, you can start in one place and move to another fairly easy. So. Robotics for us is a senior elective. Robotics is what you get to do after you do your basic programming and your electronics and your operating systems, right? Certainly the University of Minnesota, where I got my PhD, has an excellent robotics program. I'm very partial to that one. But there are a lot of, schools that do robotics. Many of the HBCUs have robotics programs. In fact, if anybody is interested, Google Spellbots. That was the Spellman robotics team that actually did RoboCup and actually competed internationally. So I would love to tell you that Alabama and Minnesota are the only places you can go, but there are, MIT, USC, Michigan, Texas A&M, UT Austin, Rice University, Georgia Tech is huge, University of Washington. There are about 150 or so PhD granting institutions. About half of them have super active robotics degrees. And of the 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 HBCUs with computer science programs, I'd say about 10 or 12 of them are pretty active in robotics. Everybody hires computer scientists. So, so a couple interesting ones. A couple years ago, Amazon was hiring roboticists because they planned to deliver packages with UAVs. Of course, they were doing that work in another country. Again, I've had, unfortunately, a lot of students, rather than go to graduate school, go work for Lockheed Martin. They are very active in snapping up our roboticists. I have a lot of students who go to graduate school. Some of them are professors, but one student who did his undergrad with me, did his graduate degrees, PhD at Notre Dame. He actually does research with the Army Research Lab as a roboticist. So the military arms, their research offices do a lot with robotics. So those are probably some of the ones maybe you wouldn't expect. But a lot of, and even if you, so when you think of robots, typically we think of two things. We think of sensing and we think of actuation. In other words, what you do is in response to what you sense in the environment. A thermostat does that though, right? I mean, certainly there's autonomous cars and they're all working on it, but when you start talking about embedded systems and sensor systems, there's a much wider range. Medtronic right there in in Minnesota, you know, they do this kind of sensing and actuation loop. So outside of what we think of as kind of these mechanisms that kind of move in the environment, there's a much larger world of trying to understand the environment and then react intelligently to that environment to accomplish something. You can get a bachelor's degree and certainly work within robotics, right? What I tell students, though, is you will be taking orders, not setting direction. If you want to have the ability to set the direction, to decide, you know, some of the problems you think are important, or even look at how you want to solve those problems, then you need a PhD. Right? That PhD basically says that you know how to solve a novel problem. You can go into robotics with a bachelor's degree, but you know you're typically going to be you know, you're going to be the person who does a lot of the implementation. Certainly you'll have a lot of ideas, but you're not going to be the one kind of setting the direction of how robotics is going to be used in a company or in a particular industry. So in terms of salary, depending upon where you are, I expect Lockheed Martin to, depending upon where you are, hit you for about 60, 70, 80. This particular student, I've had almost half of my students go to Lockheed Martin, but this particular student not only had published in robotics and kind of had a lot of experience in robotics, he had a degree in both computer science and mechanical. But you can get a bachelor's degree in computer science and leave and still expect to get 60 no matter where you go, no matter what you do, right? I know of computer scientists in Minnesota that know Unix that are getting offers for $80,000. So fortunately or unfortunately, money will be the least of your concerns, right? Most of my, it's kind of sad, but you know, a lot of my students are getting job offers in September for jobs they can't take till they graduate in May. I had one student who had 2 parts of IBM in a bidding war. I had a girlfriend of mine call me from Microsoft in April and say, hey, do you have any good students left? We have positions open. And I say no. All of the slots for companies to talk to students, our student group, they're full a semester ahead. We are booking for spring. So fortunately enough, in computer science, just find what you can enjoy, what you enjoy, and I'm pretty sure somebody's going to pay you a whole lot to do it. $20 years ago, you know, when I was at Northwest Airlines, half of IT was female, right? But now, I mean, it's just dwindled. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's better. I think for everything that we're trying to do, the problem is the women, we can do anything we want. So, you know, we can be in IT or we can be doctors, you know. I mean, that intelligence will take you anywhere. But the environment in some of our companies is not as conducive to real life as we need it to be. Some companies are much better than others, though. So what's the answer? No. I don't think it's better. I think it will get better. I think it will. Harvey Mudd College, I think at least half of their majors are women. So whatever they're doing really, really well, right? So some schools are much better at it. Some companies are much better at it. But, you know, there are some that aren't great. You know, the reason why I always tell people that I have so many kids is because we as women should not have to choose between having family and being fulfilled in our career, right? I always tell people, you know, I'm smart for a reason and I have a lot to share, but I wouldn't trade my kids for anything. And what I'm most proud about, I think, is that the young men have also demanded, you know, I want to be fulfilled in my career, but I also want to have a family that I get to see. And the more the men fight along with us women, the more I think we all get the chance to have a great career, but not have to sacrifice, you know, having a family. So it is getting better in that respect. You know, certainly I have a lot of faith in millennials to fix a lot of these problems. I see millennials as, you know, they're kind of mavericks. They're not willing to, you know, accept the things that we thought, you know, were normal. They are resetting the rules on everything. So I really believe millennials are gonna figure this out. Oh, okay. So I already talked about the defense industry. Certainly manufacturers hire a lot of roboticists, and there's actually kind of a middle job in there where you're kind of a technician, so you fix the machines or you do kind of PLC programming. Alabama, we have a lot of auto manufacturers here, so we have a lot of jobs, you know, that have to do with kind of manufacturing of anything, really, not even just cars. Let's see. So again, I think there are going to be, I think robotics is just kind of on the edge of being more human-centered. So like I said, there are some companies, kind of startups, that are looking at how to bring robotics into the home or how to bring robots into the home. So I think that so traditionally, like I said before, traditionally a lot of it has been military. That's beginning to shift a little bit with autonomous cars and auto manufacturing. So I'm not sure if that kind of answers your question. I think there are a lot more companies that are coming along that do that. In fact, I have a colleague who is or was a professor at the University of Michigan. He actually participated in the DARPA Grand Challenge. And my understanding is he actually did a autonomous car startup that I think is valued right now at $100 million. So there's a lot of kind of innovation happening kind of in the startup realm around robotics and autonomy, if you will. So, and I should probably say, you know, when you look at robotics, and I alluded to this a little bit before, there's this idea of being an embedded software engineer. So robotics is considered, or robots are considered kind of this embedded software problem. So if you look at it in that broader term, then, you know, you are 3M, you are Honeywell, you are Medtronic. You know, every company is doing something around embedded systems with the Internet of Things. So there is a professor, her name is Ayanna Howard. She's actually a endowed professor at Georgia Tech. She actually did the first part of her career at the Jet Propulsion Lab, so at JPL. And she actually has a startup around companion robots, which is really cool. So if you can get her on this program one day, I think she'd be great. If you listen to what she says, she'll tell you, you know, math. I mean, it is, you know, when you start talking Jet Propulsion Lab, I think she did maybe fuzzy inference or something. It's all math. So to have, and she did her, I believe she did her undergrad at USC, so the University of Southern California, which has a huge kind of machine around robots. You know, if you want to go to a school like that, you know, you got to have, you know, if you want to do those kinds of things, if you want to do JPL, then where you do your undergrad matters. To get into those schools where you do your undergrad matters, you need to have a really strong math background, right? You need to have 4 or 5 years worth of math. And you need to have spent the time to be good at it, right? So what you don't hear me saying is you have to, you know, be, you know, smart around math or intelligent about math or even good at math. What I'm telling you is you have to treat math like you would treat basketball or football or playing the saxophone, that you have to work at it. It takes practice. It takes time, you know. So anybody can tell you they're good at math, but what they're not telling you is how much time they spent reading and practicing and working the problems and reading the books. So if that is what you want to do, you know, get good at learning. You know, get good at figuring out what you don't know and get good at figuring out how to get that information. Certainly sitting in a class with teacher is part of it, but again, like I said, a lot of it is the, you know, the projects you decide for yourself. They're the informal things that you choose to do. It is how you spend your time outside of the class that really matters. And again, if you want to be a JPL, fearless, persistent. You know, persistent that the answer's there, fearless in how you try to go find it. There's a lot of competition for the time of our young people. I mean, there's just no way around that. What I would like to see is some of these things, I'd like to see them done during the school day. I know that the teachers have a lot of standards that they need to manage to and match to. You know, what I see here in Alabama is kids self-select out of those kinds of things because of sports or because of responsibilities at home, and it almost becomes you're lucky to have that kind of access or that kind of exposure. You know, so the question becomes, how do you take luck out of the equation, right? How do you, because I'm sure some of those, and I love sports. My kids played sports. I love watching them play sports. But in terms of well-roundedness, you got to kind of do both, right? So, I mean, it's a hard one. I have that problem as well. Talk to parents, you know, but it's so difficult because if robotics is not your experience, it's hard to, you know, kind of visualize exactly what that is and what it becomes. You know, so I guess what we do is we just have to do, you know, more work at, you know, selling to parents and showing maybe the end result. No, it's a tough problem. I agree with you. I have that issue here as well. For a long time, most of the robotics leagues here were only in the top third of Alabama because that's where all the families with money live. You know, so, you know, there's been a lot of effort here to try to expand it to the communities where people are not quite so affluent, but that takes work, you know. So that's a tough question. I don't know the answer to that. We do have 2 software engineering courses. So we do expose students to the different methodologies, you know, all the way from waterfall, pair programming, and agile. They don't really get a chance to put hands-on to that until they're seniors and they have their final projects. You know, when you talk about computing-related degrees, they go all the way from computer engineering, which is zeros and ones and assembly and C, you know, all the way over to the business school where you have MIS and, and business analysts and project managers. So depending upon where you are on that continuum, certainly if you get away from the C and assembly side and you're going more toward IT, then certainly I think most schools expose students to methodologies. And I think most of them have kind of that senior project or capstone that they take so that they get a little bit of experience with it. But, you know, a lot of, if you're talking kind of core computer science, our students spend a lot of time still on data structures and algorithms and, you know, it just really depends on, you know, what that department thinks their degree is about, right? So we've been pushing for an IT degree, which would be separate from computer science, because, you know, an IT degree isn't necessarily data structures, but you get a whole lot more architecture and a lot more of the development methodologies and things that you would use in IT. We have a fair amount of students who go to, you know, Google and IBM and Amazon and Microsoft, and right now what they want are students that have algorithms and data structures. I don't know the answer to that. What I do know is in high school that they're really focusing around the big ideas in computing, so things like problem decomposition and scaling, but none of that is necessarily programming or actually creating solutions as much as it is just understanding what computing is. Beyond that, you know, I think most high schools may teach Java, you know, or APCS 1 or 2, but I don't think they get into team-based, they don't get into kind of team-based software development. You know, there would be, you know, HSCC with BDPA, that would be probably a good place to introduce Agile, because those kids are actually, you know, within a team creating solutions. So,
all right.
You can tell, I actually kind of half like BDPA.
All right.
Nesby and Nesbitt, I like them all.
Well, Dr. Monica Anderson Herzog, on behalf of the Minnesota STEM Partnership, we appreciate your time this evening. We thank you for joining us, taking so much time to share your knowledge and wisdom about, you know, the many aspects of education, career, and lifestyle. And we look forward to working with you in the future. And please put February 28th, 2019 on your calendar, just in case.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you
everyone on the call. Thank you, everyone here in the library. Bye-bye, everyone.